out there. Welcome back to the Non-Serviam podcast. I'm Lucy Steigerwald, as always. Today in our internet void studio, we have Mike Gathers. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Let me introduce you. So Mike Gathers is a podcast host and editor at Hilaritas Press, where he helped produce the books A Non-Euclidean Perspective, Robert Anton Wilson's Political Commentaries, 1960 to 2005, which I was reading right before we started here, and Line of Light, Robert Anton Wilson on Aleister Crowley. He's had a career spanning from engineering and management to private practice, psychotherapy to executive coaching. He's currently on a sabbatical with an interest in writing more. So there's your Mike Gathers. If you are good with first, pestering you about your ideas before we get to R.A.W.
Yeah.
The traditional starting is, if I demanded you tell me what your politics are, what would you tell me?
Oh boy, a demand. Quite honestly, and maybe the story that leads up to this is important, but I think I would call myself a techno-optimist. What I would say is that in my childhood, I was very anti-authoritarian, probably some combination of genetics and parental relationships that led to me to anti-authoritarianism. I discovered the Libertarian Party in college, and I jumped on that whole hog. I actually wrote a column on the Libertarian Party going into the 92 election for my school newspaper and my engineering college. And I even had like a letter published in Playboy, just because they had, my roommate in college had a Playboy subscription, and as engineer nerds, we read the articles. And there was an article that was basically, it started out saying that libertarians are Republicans who like drugs.
Oh, yep.
Right.
Heard that for decades.
So I wrote a refutation to that was published in Playboy Letters, or Letters, whatever it is. At the time, the Libertarian Party was going through a little thing where should we be this big picture idealistic view of the world, or should we talk about things that are really of issue today and how we could address current events? And I was like, why not both? And that letter was published in the Libertarian Party paper. And I was a little deadhead. I even wrote a letter to Jerry Garcia trying to convince him to join the Libertarian Party. I'm embarrassed about that one, but there it is. And over the years, I probably shifted to more of a little L libertarian as opposed to a big L Libertarian Party. My career shifted from engineering to psychotherapy, and I was more social libertarian, I guess you could say. Government seems inevitable, so maybe we should try and do some good with it. These days, government seems bloated, and the social causes seem like an area for abuse. So maybe I'm more, I don't know. I mean, from a practical nature, I like what Milei is doing in Argentina and anarcho-capitalism. But I think we went through a huge bout of money printing so the governments could get us through COVID shutdown. So now we're dealing with inflation and the perils of fiat currency. And there's a big shift to gold, but also I think Bitcoin will become more and more viable. I believe cryptocurrency is going to be the currency of AIs and AI agents. And so all these things are happening. And maybe to sum it all up, I guess I would say that I feel like politics is like one of the lowest expressions of human consciousness.
Absolutely.
And when I get stuck in politics, I just find myself as a miserable person. And as an engineer nerd, I believe that technology is what drives, it's like an expression of human evolution, from like the opposable thumb to the eyeball to the human brain to whatever. And so I think that, technology drives progress. I think we're on the wave of a huge, like, third industrial revolution, or maybe a post-industrial revolution, where we're dealing with AI, automation, electrification, including batteries, including nuclear power is now back in vogue, and blockchain technology, crypto, and genomics are all coming together and feeding into each other. And it's really, I could go on about this for a while, but I just feel like technology is driving us to this crazy world we're in today, where we're going to have to like take a step forward in human consciousness to evolve. And I think that'll be a more libertarian thing, whatever it looks like. But the transition that we're in is just a mess.
Well, I will say that based only on that, I feel like I now know why someone like you would be attracted to Robert Anton Wilson. Because there are some similarities that I caught there, especially the techno-optimism. Perhaps this conversation will remind me to be more of a techno-optimist, which I think I was, and then stopped for a while. But I guess, well, first, is there anyone influences besides the obvious one,
Um,
political and otherwise?
so right, I think you reached out to me because of the recent book Non Euclidean Politics by Robert Anton Wilson, or it's a collection of his essays that we put together. I think that that's probably the big influence, and you can start to look, and we'll probably talk about all of the influences on Bob, and the ones that get me excited are people like Bucky Fuller that preached techno optimism, abundance, doing more with less. And it's always just kind of been my thing, I guess. I've always been excited about technology and anti-authoritarian, I guess. So I've just been drawn to Bob. And there's people in our community, the Robert Anton Wilson community, that have different ideas and maybe are much less, hey, we need to do intelligent innovation, or we need to think about how we do innovation. And I guess that sounds wonderful to me, but I don't think that's really how the world works. It just kind of, the AI is out of the bag. There's political forces holding it back. There's capitalism constraining it, and money and energy and power and all these things, but it's going. And that's a whole nother discussion, I guess. But, I'm not like a spokesperson for the community, so to speak. And in fact, I think some people are violently against my position, which is fine.
Okay, well, how did you find Robert Anton Wilson? And when?
Somehow I was always interested in Timothy Leary, and I don't even know where the heck this started. In high school, we were watching Cheech and Chong's Nice Dreams, and Timothy Leary has a cameo. My friend was like pointing that, hey, there's Tim Leary, like, hey, there's that guy you're into. And I have this memory, but like, how did I, just a dumb suburban Houston kid, find Tim Leary? But I was always into him. When the internet became a thing and I could access more information, there was a really interesting website in the 90s called deoxy.org, and it paired Tim Leary and Robert Anton Wilson on the same page. It had a page for like Alan Watts and John Lilly and Buddhism and this and that, but it had Leary and Wilson together when at the early stage of that. And it actually had a like Robert Anton Wilson 1932-never. And if you clicked on never, it went into one of his essays on immortality. And it was just too much for me to deal with. I couldn't wrap my head around immortality. It broke my brain. I think I went down a Terence McKenna rabbit hole for several years and then came back slowly but surely to Robert Anton Wilson. So we're in my 30s. I digested him whole hog. I had a kind of a collection website that's still up where I collected all of his stuff that wasn't published, which is sort of how I became involved with putting these books together of unpublished materials. Mm-hmm. And I just went whole hog into Wilson in my 30s and ended up doing a podcast now for his kind of, I guess you could say, his dying wish. He asked his daughter to keep his books in print. Mm-hmm. And she hired a guy, a friend of his, Richard Rassa, who created Hilaritas Press, and really just now finished that objective of taking all of his books that were kind of not by Dell, like Illuminatus, and putting them into print and really giving thorough proofreading and new covers and all that good stuff. And somebody suggested doing a podcast in the COVID years, and somehow I ended up being the podcast host. So we've been going over 4.5 years, the Hilaritas Press podcast, trying to explore all the various people that he covered and the thoughts, and it covers a lot of diverse territory. So,
Yeah. I know you interviewed my friend slash former co-worker person, Jesse Walker, a couple of times. And
yeah,
he did the introduction to the new political compilation.
Raw
Um,
Politics is kind of the working title, I guess.
yeah. I feel like if I say raw, I'm going to be like overly familiar with the man, though I was vaguely aware of him for many years. One of my good friends was gushing about the Illuminatus trilogy like 2 decades ago at this point, and I've never yet gone for it because I have an impression of it that it might be sort of too inscrutable for my preferences, but certainly the political writing isn't really that. And well, what a charming man, especially in the interviews in the book as well.
Yeah, Illuminatus is a big book. It's the kind of book that a mind like mine, I have to like take notes so I
Mm,
can remember all the different things that are going on. And I, I'm maybe just too linear for things like that. It's an undertaking.
I thought it might be, but I'll check again one of these days. Who is Robert Anton Wilson?
Boy, great question. So I had a podcast intro where I tried to boil it down, and I'm trying to remember sort of like psychedelic philosopher and maybe that a writer. I mean, he wrote over 30 books. Well, I guess I want to say Bob, and so like you seem a little adverse to using raw as it's too comfortable, and I can't say I ever really had a meaningful interaction with the man, but I call him Bob sometimes, like we tend to do, Uncle
Mm,
Bob. Ultimately he came to this philosophy where you might call it maybe logic, which is, we try to break free of certainty, try to break free of yes or no, and find like things happen on a spectrum, and where's the middle ground, where's the maybe, kind of the death of certainty. I can't really be certain about anything, so I'm going to start thinking in maybe. And it took that a step further, and he would like look at different models, like all these political models. We could start with socialism and capitalism, fascism and communism, as kind of these polarities on this single spectrum. But he got into all these anarchists, individualist, mutualist anarchists like Proudhon and Hosea Warren and Lysander Spooner and Tucker. But he loved just exploring all these models. And by model agnosticism, like just not saying we have a one true model, and what can we look at these different models and take, like maybe build our own model. So take what we find valuable out of model X and use that and discard the rest. And also just kind of hold all these models lightly, so to as a Buddhist might say, and not get too attached to them. And that really our mind likes to think in terms of models, and we confuse the map, the model, with the territory. And with Bob, you could even take that a step further, from maybe logic to model agnosticism to what he referred to as neurological relativity, and that we all have a very unique nervous system and brain that perceiving and expressing itself in its own unique way, and we're all very subjectively experiencing the world differently. And then he loved the eight circuit model to kind of bring that to a little bit more concrete, eight circuit model of consciousness, which Leary developed and he really popularized, particularly with this book, Prometheus Rising. Could go into that if you'd like, but it just kind of showing this way of looking at the world through different lenses. And as a writer, he loved to kind of take you down one path and then completely pull the rug on you and leave you kind of in this void of like, I thought I had the correct answer machine, and then you pulled the rug on me, and now I'm in this void of whatever, and then he'll steer you down a different path, and then pull the rug on you, and so just kind of this wonderful way of showing you not to get attached to your mental models.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe another way to say is everybody gets the Robert Anton Wilson they deserve, and so that's kind of my Robert Anton Wilson right now.
Just to add some color, I guess, I found, I mean, like Jesse Walker, okay, in the introduction of the Non-Euclidean book, talks all about the, if you want to call them, contradictions in Ra's political views. And though they are sort of contradictory, I think there is kind of like there's like a through line of principle, even as he's saying things that are in some ways oppositional. And like, I feel like I get it. And there's one interview where he mentions Rothbard, and he compliments and insults Rothbard simultaneously and says he's like smart but like super limited. And I always would joke among like American libertarians, or people who came out of that at least, that like maybe I've even heard you get the Rothbard you deserve as well, and if not, it makes as much sense, because that he changed tremendously over the decades, but he had a rather repellent level of certainty. His switches seemed like more of a betrayal of previous things, as opposed to like, well, I've already decided I like Ra better than Rothbard in the past 10 minutes.
And yeah, and if you follow Robert Anton Wilson, you know, he talks about how he was a Catholic and then he became a Trotskyist. And then I don't know if I think Jesse talks about he became like an Ayn Randian. And,
Mm-hmm.
and then at some point his wife found Kropotkin in the encyclopedia and was like, holy shit, read this, check this out. And, you know, I think that started his anarchist and libertarian kind of thing. And towards the end of his life, you know, he suffered from polio as an infant and a toddler, and was cured of that through some alternative therapies, but suffered from post-polio syndrome later in life and was mostly medicating pain with cannabis. And the citizens of California had voted to legalize marijuana, I guess on a medical level, and the government was causing all kinds of problems. So he became this big proponent of the 10th Amendment of states' rights. And in a sense, the, you know, later days, Uncle Bob was just grumpy old man who wants his weed. And, you know, God, you know, that's great. If you get to the age of 70, I want to be that guy too, to a certain extent.
I guess we should hit Discordianism, just because I'm trying to think. Did I learn about that from Jesse's book, or maybe my friend who read Illuminatus? But can you explain that to the people? So much as anyone can, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so the snappy liner on Discordianism is it a joke disguised as a religion, or a religion disguised as a joke? But there's two guys, Greg Hill and Kerry Thornley, and man, you can go down some really interesting rabbit holes, particularly with Thornley, who was implicated in the whole JFK thing, and that's its own wild story.
Oh yeah, that rooms Dim Bell. Yes, okay.
Yeah, he was in the military with Oswald, and they were like buddies in so much as Oswald just kind of was a loner and Thornley was a weirdo, and they hung out together. And so Jim Garrison actually went after him during all his investigations, and they kind of brought that on themselves. And then by the Discordian pranks they were pulling, and then it kind of got to Thornley, and it, like, he kind of had a psychotic break around all this stuff apparently. And I'm not accurate with this kind of thing, but
this is in Jesse Walker's book. It's just been
another guy that is the Discordian historian is Adam Gorightly. He's got some book out there, I'm sure. And they were just kind of creating this thing and having fun with it, and mocking conspiracy theories and mocking the establishment. And boy, there's the Principia Discordia you can find it on the internet all over the place, and PDF form is kind of the holy book of the Discordians. But Robert Anton Wilson was kind of part of the inner circle creating this whole church of moon. I guess the whole idea, maybe to bring it back to first principles, is that there was this big party, and the Greek gods were throwing a big party, and Eris, the god of chaos, was not invited. And she was very upset by this, and so she created a golden apple that said Callisti, which means in Greek, to the prettiest one. And she rolled it into the party, and all the Greek goddesses fought over the apple because they all thought they were the prettiest one. And that was the seed of discord that was planted in the Greek pantheon, so to speak. And so it's kind of a religion around the goddess of chaos. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, their joke religion, but also just, maybe not take things so seriously. Maybe not take religion so seriously. Maybe not take government so seriously. I don't know how to put that. Maybe, but
does it have? I mean, the association with just conspiracy theories in general, is it just sort of the JFK thing?
With Bob and conspiracy theories, like Illuminatus has just got conspiracy weaved all the way through it. Mm-hmm. And the deal was that Bob and his co-author on Illuminatus, Robert Shea, worked for Playboy at the time as editors. And they were involved with the Playboy Forum, which was kind of a political forum within Playboy where they talked about politics. And they got all these crazy letters sent to them about all the conspiracy theories. And they were kind of like, what if they were all true? So that's kind of what Illuminatus is like, what if all this crazy batshit paranoid stuff was true? But it was also a way for Bob to exploit, I guess you would say, gullibility, or how everything we've talked about, how we all get caught up in our maps, and let's kind of follow these rabbit holes, and then oops, let me pull the rug out from under you. And so it was a way for him to expose the folly of human nature in a way, by leveraging these conspiracy theories. And so it kind of it's all over Bob's work in a way. And in fact, oftentimes, really far right, what I would call paranoid people, really latch on to Bob, and they don't usually seem to get the joke.
Yeah. Okay.
And so you have Bob has different audiences, I guess you would say. And sometimes it's the far right, crazy, conspiracy types, and it's the psychedelic hippie, countercultural types, and all kinds.
Yeah. I don't want to constrain him, but I was curious where you think he sits on. Does he sit anywhere on the left and right spectrum? Does he belong to any particular political side or ideology?
Well, I think we could look at it two different ways. So if you got the book Non Euclidian Perspective, there's an essay in there towards the back called Left and Right Non Euclidian Perspective that was written in 1998, and I actually sent you a link for the show notes. It's on the web in quite a few places. And I think that really is if you're just going to read one thing, that's the thing to read. And maybe I can run through some quotes here, but he says he became fascinated with a number of alternatives or excluded middles that transcend the hackneyed debate between monopoly capitalism and totalitarian socialism. My favorite among them was these alternatives was, until some extent still is, the individualist mutualist anarchism of Proudhon, Warren, Andrews, Spooner, and Tucker. There's another quote I'll throw out. Oh, well, to finish that one, most interesting of recent utopias to me is the ideas of Buckminster Fuller, in which money is abolished, computers manage the economy, program with a prime directive to advantage all without disadvantaging any. The same goal sought by the mutualist system of basing society entirely on negotiated contract. And then he says, since I don't have the correct answer, I don't know which of these systems would work best in practice. I would like to see them all tried in different places just to see what would happen. And there's another quote: my economic ideas are a blend of Benjamin Tucker, Spooner, Fuller, Buckminster Fuller, Ezra Pound, Henry George, Murray Rothbard, Frederick Douglass, Korzybski, who's a language theorist, Proudhon, and Marx. And I might even
wild list.
Yeah, and I might even throw in Wilhelm Reich and his mass psychology of fascism, which he really doesn't discuss. And we didn't explore too much with this politics book, but that's kind of an undercurrent that he was always looking at. And so it was almost like he loved this free market of ideas up to the point where, like, what if every state adopted a different political philosophy and they all got to like battle each other out? Or, well, yeah. And at the same time, when it came to current politics, he was pretty anti-right.
Mm-hmm.
And you might even say he really got fooled by Clinton, and he voted. I don't know if he voted for Clinton, but he kind of thought like Clinton is actually showing some signs of positivity here. And then he's like, no, the bastard turned out to be just another politician. And so I do think when it came down to where the rubber hits the road in practical matters, he tended to be a little bit more left than right. And he definitely had negative things to say about Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's also an essay from quite a bit before that, which is Why I Am a Right-Wing Anarchist, from 1969. And interestingly, in the book it says this was written under a pseudonym, Ronald Weston, and is sometimes misattributed to Robert Shea, which is his Illuminatus co-author, right?
Correct.
But the book seems pretty confident that it is in fact his work. I'm kind of intrigued by him using a pseudonym for that amongst all other writings, but I don't know if you have anything to say about that. There are some things in here that do not sound obviously right-wing in a lot of ways. Not even like ANCAP or sort of those things. I don't know.
So at one point before he became a published author, he was really writing as much as he could for magazines all over the place just to, pay the bills. And he was actually working for a lot of before he started working for Playboy, he was working for a lot of these smut magazines, I'll call them, and where he was probably writing 3 or 4 articles in the magazine under different names and things
funny.
like that. So he started kind of writing with pseudonyms back then, I believe, and why he chose a pseudonym for that particular essay, I'm not quite sure. It is definitely Bob. I think we can say that. There was just when we're all kind of like digging through the internet and the libraries trying to find this stuff. And it was just basically misattributed to Shea because of the way it was discovered, but it was really a Wilson essay. Yeah, I couldn't say why he chose that specific pseudonym or why he chose a pseudonym for that specific essay. He wrote, in addition to the smut magazines, a lot of what you see in this politics book is just him in the early 60s writing for all kinds of anarchist zines, even like what you might call hippie cooperative that he was a part of in Yellow Springs, Ohio, that had their own zine where they talked about this kind of stuff. But different from the Chicago Seed to the Berkeley Barb to City Miner to Roger Spark, just all these, like back in the day when before the internet, when it was just like newspapers and zines that go out to 100 people, 1,000 people, I don't know, but he was writing all over the place. And sometimes I don't know that there's rhyme or reason to the pseudonyms in my mind.
I mean, well, he says a socialist state is worse menace to mankind than even the capitalist state, which sounds both right-wing and not at all, which is fun. There is also but the rent thing, which shows up in other essays. I'm having learned about Georgism not that long ago for the first time, a couple of years, and kind of trying to learn more about it. He certainly has, like, he talks about land in a very Georgist and
Yeah.
leftist way. I don't know if he stuck to that. It kind of seems like he didn't contradict that as much, but the fact that that's in the right wing anarchist thing is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think the idea, as I understand it, I'm so rusty on all of this, but that usury, the loaning of money for interest or exorbitant interest, is kind of where it starts, and rent is an extension of usury. And so, yeah, there was some ideas about like you have to occupy the land that you own and use it. You can't just rent it out. And what if we tried that kind of an economic system? And I think what you'll find is he's just a really flexible mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we put all these in chronological order, because you can kind of see the changes and the shifts in his thought as he kind of goes from, early career 1960s thought to, as I said, grumpy old man just wants his weed, and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. There's too many things I highlighted because I like them. Like, will absolute equality between men be achieved? No, only relative equality. But
Mm.
absolute equality is attainable only at the end of a gun, which is a price we right-wing anarchists don't care to pay. I mean, that's a lot nicer version of sort of the most mean-sounding anarcho-capitalist thought on the internet today. So he might have been a better seller of that idea if that's something he wanted to keep doing than the people that ended up doing so. um, is there a particular thing, like you most disagree with or dislike even about him? All these different versions of him.
If anything else, if Bob was to take a stance on anything about all these ideas we're talking about, it's maybe just to hold them all lightly and investigate them all, and they all have maybe some sort of value on a scale of 1 to 10, some more than others, and decide for yourself. I guess I'm personally, again, so one of the things Bob really got into was the acceleration of information.
Mm-hmm.
He was very pro internet in his final years and very excited about what internet would bring. And, he just kind of had this rap called Jumping Jesus. And it was like, how much knowledge was there around Jesus's time? And how often did that double? And you see this kind of exponential curve of it taking off. And he was very much into that. And I was very excited about this as kind of a techno-optimist, I guess you would say. But I don't know that he necessarily shared that techno-optimism to the fullest. He wasn't excited about the nitty gritty of technology, I don't think, as much as I might be. Because he leaned left, maybe, or we have kind of more of a left leaning bias in our community. And now the tech bros are considered to be right wing. So there's kind of this anti tech bro sentiment that's out there. And within our community, I guess you might say. And I don't share that at all. I mean, I'm not pro billionaire, let's go for trillions. But I do believe these are the people that are building technology and building the future. They're builders. And we could get into the billionaire politics, but for the most part, I think entrepreneurship is a path towards self-realization. I'd say Bob was pro self-realization.
Mm.
And I get excited about innovation, and sometimes I feel like I'm not quite as on the same page as a lot in our community. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of like, what do I disagree with Bob
Yeah,
about? Yeah.
I mean, I will say that it was sort of a weird nostalgia to remember not that the internet is completely destroyed or anything like that, but the internet, even I remember, we're talking like early 2000s, a little bit before. I don't remember exactly when I got on the internet, the late 90s, I think. and sort of the, we turned it more into a corporate walled garden than people in the 90s probably would have ever liked. And speaking for myself, I wanted to be rooting for the tech bros such as they are. I wanted them to not sort of be quite as miserably corporate and to go to the White House and, do the thing. Like, I wanted the optimism of what a tech bro can do to make these beautiful changes. I think I used to have some of that, and I think it's gone now, unfortunately. But the desire to have that optimism in the technology. I mean, I kind of hate Luddites and primitivists, or at least their ideology a bit. So I have a great sympathy for that. I'm just not sure where I think it's going anymore in that way. So
Sure. And so I guess to clarify a little, Bob is he liked the internet as kind of the acceleration of communication and information, but he also saw it promoting the maybe logic thing to the extent that, it gave you all these different perspectives, and you kind of had to decide you had to use critical thinking in a way to decide what fits for you and what didn't. I mean, I remember the first time I introduced my wife to a browser and search engines, and she put in Shih Tzu, our dog, and in one search engine and got like the top 10 results, and she put it in another search engine and got the top 10 results, and they were different from each other, and she was really upset about this. But that was like, that breaks that certainty that Bob was so big on breaking. And now, it's kind of come to social media dominates the internet in a way, and then, like you said, corporate walled gardens. And the question is always, what do you think Bob would think of today about X, Y, and Z? And I kind of hate asking. I've asked those questions on my podcast, and I kind of hate that. But my own opinion, I think like social media draws something out of our unconscious. I mean, I become a shitty person on social media a lot of times, and then oh, social media is evil and it's leading me to be a shitty person. Or I could say, this is kind of exposing the shadowy part of my consciousness, and I really need to take a look at that and wonder, why do I just kind of mouth off on email every now and then when I'm pissed off, and instead I have to think twice about my email behavior, or I mouth off on Facebook when I get mad because you're so fucking stupid. Why? So to me, it is, like I say, I think technology is going to be driving a step function change in consciousness, hopefully for the positive. And part of where I see that right now is social media really exposing this shitty part of ourselves. And it's really up for us, I think, all as individuals to take a look at like, what is happening to me when I'm doom scrolling or whatever it is, and how can I grow and become more conscious as a realization of all this.
I don't know if I can fully explain, but like I really like the type of uncertainty and the maybe that he's expressing, where to me it's not just the vagueness, the like something I sort associate with someone like Jordan Peterson, who's like, well, what do you mean by, like, an excuse to not answer? He seems so sort of confident and clear in his maybe and who knows and sort of thing. And I like that. I think the balance is very appealing.
I think it's an interesting comment, and noticing that sometimes when we get into this maybe logic stuff, especially at first, our language becomes really mushy. And one way to kind of clarify things is just say, it seems to me X, Y, and Z. And you're kind of just saying, this is my current perspective right now. Ultimately, I think there's the idea that we're kind of each responsible for coming up with our own personal point of view on all this stuff, and do that by taking what's useful and discarding the rest, and building your own model that works for you. And that you can, it's okay to speak with certainty around that as well. Like, this is what works for me, as opposed to like some Bill Clinton, it depends on what the definition of is.
I was also thinking of that, of course.
Yeah.
I guess with the book, I don't know if you had in mind, like, what do you hope people get out of Robert Anton Wilson and that book in particular? People who both know him well and maybe don't so much.
We had all this unpublished material, particularly just a treasure trove from the 60s that we wanted to get out there. And my original goal was to get this out before the election, but we didn't. We kind of lost momentum in a lot of ways. But let me see. I'm going to read my introduction here because it's really just a ramble about how the book came to be. But as I close up, and maybe this speaks to my own philosophy, where we're just at a huge transition, moving from like the industrial age to the internet age, moving from the age of the printing press to the age of AI and internet. We're moving from an oil and gas driven economy to a nuclear driven economy. And we're just in the middle of a bunch of cycles, and everything's kind of maybe a bigger cycle that's more interesting for our purposes is that we're in like this 80 to 100 year social economic cycle that started with the United States kind of being the big dog post World War II. And it's been the global hegemon since World War II, and that's kind of ending.
Mm-hmm.
And now we see kind of if the cycle continues a rising China. But I think with all these other things that are happening, we're really entering into a new age, so to speak. And so what I wrote in the book is in a time where old political, social, economic structures erode away and collapse, paradigm shift, and new structures have yet to crystallize into place. Perhaps the essays found here can help us all think outside the box, break free of the past, and move a little bit more open-mindedly into the future. And that I think a lot about what the hell is it going to look like in 20 years?
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten next to nowhere on that. And I think that's part of the problem is there's so much uncertainty that people are freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
That people are really starting to, there's so much polarization. People are really saying it's hard to be in the middle. It's hard to be kind of an independent, so to speak. You're just kind of drawn to one side or the other. All these things are happening. And in my mind, it's just like flexibility is where we need to move towards. Maybe just, this is not really part of the book, but just learning to be more compassionate for each other. That's a whole nother topic, probably.
That generally can't hurt, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, and ultimately, I guess the transcend the hackneyed debate between monopoly capitalism and totalitarian socialism. Like it's just to me, that's where we're going. These
Mm-hmm.
are the poles we're stuck in right now. But arguing about one over the other, to me, frankly, is a dumb argument because it's really this polarity is going to resolve into something new. I don't know what the hell that's going to look like. So I'm just kind of very excited, to be frank, and just strap in and see where it goes. And it's going to be a bumpy ride. So hold on. Yeah.
Somehow I'm already feeling a little more optimistic just based on
Great.
that. Like, I've forgotten how to enjoy the ride a bit, I think. I think you kind of hit the idea what lessons his politics give to the average schmo and the average radical. Sort of hit that, I think. But is there anyone alive today who's sort of the I don't know the child of Robert Anton Wilson, or someone who can take his mantle up in some way, or is he just sort of one and done?
You know, the 60s gave us a lot of very interesting people from Alan Watts and Timothy Leary, and it's just kind of the psychonaut perspective more than the political perspective. But you know, John Lilly, Alan Watts, Tim Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, Terence McKenna. These are the giants of psychedelic philosophy, and you know that leans toward libertarianism, and it also leans towards like the Earth as a. We'd much rather see the Earth as a nature park than a capitalist corporate bureaucracy. Um, the short answer is no. There is
Yeah.
nobody out there that I could point to. There are some some folks that are popular, and some of them I don't really jive with, to be honest. Douglas Rushkoff is a name that I'll throw out there. That he was a big supporter of Bob. He's a little too Chicken Little, the sky is falling, a little too dogmatic about his perspective on billionaires.
Mm.
He seems to think he's got them figured out, and my agnostic perspective would be that we don't have anybody else figured out, not particularly not ourselves.
I like
Um,
that. Yeah, that's fair.
Eric Davis is kind of a academic type, and he writes a lot, but I wouldn't say he's pushing frontiers so much as just the academic that's really studying and writing about all this. Um, Guys like Grant Morrison
Oh, there you go. That's a name. Sure.
is an interesting one. And as he was telling another kind of colleague about all this, he was like, "We are the old guys now. It's time for us to step up." And there's a
Mm.
guy named Richard Metzger that did Disinfo Nation a long time ago that was putting on a thing called the Magic Show. I don't know what quite happened with that, but it was going to be about magicians, occultist type magicians, and that more the magic type of thing. With Grant, that's who was talking to Grant about, like, we're the old guys now. It's time for us to get the message out. But there's always been this discussion of who the next Raw is, and there's never a good answer.
Now that you mentioned magic stuff, the whole I don't really know what Raw's connection to Aleister Crowley is and stuff. I know of him, but I don't know if there's anything you can add about that.
Sure. I mean, that was the previous book
Hmm.
where there was like a 50-page roughly document that was discovered that was unpublished, where Bob was writing about Crowley. We combine it with 4 or 5 other major pieces he had written to put a book on Crowley out. Um, and I think he mentions Crowley in terms of political philosophy a little bit, like his influence of Fuller, but with Crowley, it's more like Crowley's saying was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law."
Hmm.
And then what doesn't get said, but is really even more important to me, is love is the law, love under will. And so there's a whole philosophy there to unpack that is probably above my pay grade. But there's that kind of libertarian philosophy. And one of Crowley's students, Jack Parsons, actually wrote some really big libertarian essays on. He was a famous rocket engineer.
That's right. I knew there was a rocket science element. I was
Yeah,
trying
well,
to
the
remember.
Strange Angel. There was a book, a biography, which led to a mini series, I think, on Amazon about him. But he was a devoted student of Crowley, and he wrote some libertarian essays. But the story is that Bob Wilson was having lunch or something with Alan Watts, and Alan recommended this Crowley biography by Israel Regardie, um, and the name is escaping me at the moment. But he recommended that as like the best book on mysticism that he'd ever read. Alan Watts said that to Bob, and Regardie was actually a personal assistant to Crowley for several years in London, and more of a occultist in his own right. But he wrote this wonderful book, which to me, people don't always agree with me on this for sure, but it was kind of the definitive take on Crowley. And anyway, that book set Bob off on a journey into Crowley and magic. That's really what kind of the Lion of Light book is about. And I guess you would say it's about achieving higher states of consciousness. It's about imposing your will, or like achieving your goals by imposing your will, kind of by setting your intent. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And that doesn't mean do anything. It's kind of
Hmm.
like finding your true will. They call it, conversation with the holy guardian, with your holy guardian angel. But it's kind of like tapping into your most authentic and true self, and expressing that out into the world. That was a big part. Magic, psychedelics, politics, model agnosticism. Those are all big parts of the raw reality labyrinth, I guess you might say.
The weird connections I'm now making between Robert Anton Wilson, the maybe thing feeling sort of antithetical to Objectivism, and I actually didn't get to his whole objection to Objectivism. But in the previous chapter, it ends with he's talking about protest. What the hell is it actually called? How to wage nonviolent revolution. And the very last passage in that, after all sorts of things, says people who have read Ayn Rand and found the solid core of truth in the midst of all her bull are more likely to start this movement rolling than the average Marxist or Tolstoyan Christian anarchist, which I found kind of fascinating. And honestly, some of the best people I've known, very libertarian people, they often have just this little sprinkle of Ayn Rand. Like, you really can't have too much, but just a little spice of Ayn Rand seems to lead to good things. But at the same time, objectivism seems rather at odds with agnosticism and maybe in all things.
Yes.
So I was wondering if there's any connections there that that I'm missing, or you can elaborate on.
Well, first, I think it's easy to make a lot of leaps with this. Like I said, we're all over the place with Bob. There's just so much to cover. So I get it. I think Bob was attracted to the objectivist philosophy, but like he found with Catholicism and Trotskyism, that it became very dogmatic. And I think that seems to be the major knock against Rand, is that it just became super dogmatic. And if you disagreed with her, you were thrown out of the cult, so to speak. And that's the part that he just was like, no, that's, again, I don't feel like these are correct answer machines, that we need to take these with a grain of salt and we should be able to question them. And he had a very kind of scientific approach to all this. Like, you make your hypothesis, you test your hypothesis, you see the results, and you adjust your hypothesis based on the results. And so, if my experience in the world disagrees with this philosophy, then I'm going to start to question things. And I think that's just natural. But again, he found himself with coming up with the wrong correct answers, depending on the cult he was in, let's say, and including Randism. And eventually he was like, oh, this is just another dogmatic thing. And I'm, maybe my biggest thing is not to be into dogmatic things.
And yet there's that compliment, which I don't know if I actually understand why. I mean, I think I get the solid core of truth aspect to Rand, as much as she's very easy to mock in certain ways. I don't know. I almost get that passage, and I don't quite at the same time, I think.
Right. I mean, there's a certain individualist, right-leaning anarchism, I guess, in my mind, with objectivism. And I think he was picking up on that individualism. But at the same time, and saying that, I'm more of at this point in my life, whenever he's writing that, I'm more of an individualist anarchist than a Marxist, let's say. And I think you could learn more from this, but and take it with a grain of salt. Don't get stuck in it. Don't become an Ayn Rand bobblehead, so to speak.
We hit most of the things I think that I wanted to talk to you about, but we like to do a little lightning round to end things, if you are willing and able.
I'll do my best.
Okay. Well, the first question in that is, to you, optimism or pessimism?
Optimism.
Your favorite conspiracy theory?
I wish I knew more about 9/11.
Okay.
Or, I mean, I think that's just one I'd love to unpack the same way World War II was maybe unpacked with some alternative historians.
Do you have a overrated and or underrated intellectual of choice?
You mentioned Jordan Peterson. I give him an overrated, and I feel like that's a few years too late. He's kind of fallen by the wayside. I mean, there's no shortage of overrated intellectuals, probably.
Underrated, then?
Boy, maybe. I guess when it comes to like this 80 to 100 year socioeconomic cycle, that is kind of termed the long-term debt cycle by a hedge fund manager, Ray Dalio, that has really wonderful books on this cycle and how it defines the rise and fall of global hegemons. And that's also on a social perspective outlined in the book called The Fourth Turning by Howe and Strauss. I don't know if that's very underrated, but I think that really, it's like almost should be mandatory reading in a way, because it really explains like the internal political polarization, the global globalization, and all the things that are happening in the world. Ray Dalio, a hedge fund manager, explains them quite elegantly. Like that gave me peace of mind. Like, oh, this explains what's happening.
Yes or no to voting?
Yes.
All right.
Um, I vote on local elections. I think it's important. We have a lot of ballot initiatives here in the state of Colorado that brought us legal weed,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is great. And it's also brought us wolf reintroduction into the state, which I think is just a big administrative hassle that we really shouldn't be deciding as a populace. But and at the same time, this is funny, I'm thinking about this a lot lately. I think I voted for one Republican or Democrat for president in all my life. I've always voted, always vote third party. But when the Iraq War became a thing, I voted for John Kerry as a not Bush vote. And the
Yeah,
whole
he did.
day, I like voted first thing in the morning, and I felt like I needed to shower for the rest of the day.
Which government department, administrator, whatever, would you abolish if you can get rid of one?
Oh man, I'd have to see a list. I guess I'm not as up on that as I used to be. I used to have like Doge fantasies about streamlining government. Okay, this is maybe just what popped into my head, and maybe won't be very popular, but the Department of Education. On a federal level, I think it's completely useless. My aunts were school teachers their whole life, and I think it was the what No Child Left Behind
Mm-hmm.
just took all the love of teaching right out of them, and they retired. And maybe we need to look more carefully at what the Department of Education does. But I think, just to answer your question, I think if you eliminated that one, it would be a net benefit.
Mm-hmm. I would have usually gone with the DEA just because
Oh, sure, yeah.
things that shouldn't exist, even sort of in theory. Like there's an imaginary version of cops where they just come and help you if you're in trouble, but the DEA exists to be like, we will control the substances that you consume and sell and trade and what have you. You know, there's not even to me, there's not even a theoretical justification for that.
I guess I'm like I said, I was more of a left libertarian for a long time, and maybe I'm leaning a little bit more right libertarian these days. But if you look at like education, what is it? Education, housing, and healthcare are three of
Mm.
the biggest problem areas we have. And they all seem to be just littered with regulation to the point where it's just stifled. So what if you deregulated those? That's more of a right libertarian approach. And would that solve a lot of our problems?
I mean, I'm certainly not against that. Spooner or Rothbard or Tucker, let's say.
Spooner, Tucker, or Rothbard?
Mm-hmm.
Partially because I couldn't tell you what those three represent without looking it up. And partially to be more Robert Anton Wilson esque, I would say maybe.
Fair enough. Um, Worst U.S. president of all time?
All time, I know about guys like Harding, I think, that were kind of in a similar populist era that we're in now, that were pretty big grifters. Um, so I don't know enough to feel like I can really have the definitive all time, but I think Trump is, for a lot of obvious reasons. And there's actually some things I kind of like of what he's done, to be frank. I say that with trepidation. And to a certain extent, I think he's just kind of an expression of the times we're in. That, like I said, the U.S. global hegemonic society is collapsing. So NATO is on the way out. Whether Trump accelerates that or not, it's just kind of the path we're on.
Yeah, cause and effect is sort of muddled together in that way, though. What came first? the vibes or the Trump sort of changing the feeling. Like Trump made me realize that norms actually sometimes matter a little bit, because if only because I find it truly disheartening that how many people seem to take their sort of signals on how to behave from the president. That's a grotesque
Yeah.
thing. But sort of his unpleasantness permeated more than I ever thought was possible in a way that is bad. You know, norms are limited, they're not that important. Politely blowing things up is blowing things up, but at the same time, sort of the permission to be more overtly awful didn't really help anything either.
Yeah, I should say that there's just all kinds of awful with Trump, and I try not to think about it. So because it helps me sleep at night to not think about it. But what you're saying is 100% true. Part of me like feels like in the 80s we had this political correctness where it became like we just didn't talk about things like racism.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump has kind of given everybody permission to talk about racism, and not that that's great, but it kind of exposes this shadowy underbelly of stuff that's really out there that
Mm-hmm.
really hasn't been dealt with it because we just said, let's be politically correct, let's just not talk about it. You know, we have masked, unidentified, poorly trained military police running around with no body cams, doing illegal search and seizure and racial profiling in the interior. There are police inside our country. I mean, to think about that is pardon my French, just fucking staggering that is going on. It just the ultimate horror in a way. So yeah, I'm not pro Trump by any means, and I just yeah, let's put him down as the worst president.
I mean, I'd say almost every there are almost no wrong answers to me. Do you first stop in your time machine?
Oh, first stop in my time machine.
Mm-hmm. You can come back and all. It's just like a casual trip, you know. But like,
Oh God, the lame answer that just came into my mind is to go back to like 2013 when Bitcoin was invented and invest. Um, boy, I would like to go 20 years in the future and see what the world looks like.
that's not a bad thing at all, and that's probably
Yeah.
very healthy in some ways. Is there something important you've changed your mind about in the past, I don't know, 1 to 5 years?
Really, I would say going back to this long-term debt cycle slash fourth turning thing, that has been one idea that I've really latched onto and blew my mind. Another, we never covered like the eight circuit model, which is a whole big rabbit hole, but there was a book actually recommended to me through Jordan Peterson
Gasp.
on Carl Jung,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the evolution of consciousness analyzed through mythology, and it kind of maps to these four circuits, these like what I'll call infant consciousness, toddler consciousness, preschooler consciousness, and adolescent consciousness. So those two things, that kind of Jungian approach to human consciousness evolution through that book, and the Dalio long-term debt cycle slash how fourth turning have been the most interesting ideas that have come across my radar in the last 5 years.
Okay. And a traditional question here on Non Serviam: how would I get a cappuccino in your imagined political utopia?
Wow. I like so. Boy, there's so many ways to go with this. Part of me thinks there's going to be like an automated cappuccino machine out there that runs on cryptocurrency, and you just tap to pay. And the other part of me is like, well, what kind of cappuccino are you looking for? Because there's going to be maybe a handcrafted cappuccino with a
Mm-hmm.
barista that I still want to have every now and then, and where the beans are grown and roasted just right by human hands, and then the espresso is pulled by a human it's like artisanal.
Right, it's the Star Trek question of like, does the replicated food taste worse?
Oh,
There's
that's
always the Luddites who are like, I cook it by hand and stuff. So I
well, I
don't
think
know.
the thought, maybe my thought is that like a lot of the goods, the basic goods we need are going to be mass produced, and then we'll enter into this area of abundance, but there'll still be demand then for people that want to enjoy. I could get the IKEA furniture and maybe that's all I need, but maybe I want to hire somebody to build me a hand carved bookshelf. I don't know.
Hmm.
And so the artisanal world, I think, will be, when you want to get beyond the commodified cheap world, there's going to be an artisanal world that'll be available to us, that'll be employing people, and we'll see how it goes.
Is there, say again, like 1 to 3 pieces of media that listeners could seek out? Like beyond what we've talked about today, stuff you recommend, but things that are sort of along the same thoughts we've had today.
Because we're talking about Robert Anton Wilson, I will, and because I'm a big fan, I would say Prometheus Rising, which details the Eight Circuit model I've kind of touched on here and there, is a fascinating read on a way to think about consciousness and changing consciousness and
Mm-hmm.
growing and evolving consciousness. I could recommend another Robert Anton Wilson book, Cosmic Trigger, which is sort of semi-autobiographical and really is another great read for just getting into the world of Robert Anton Wilson.
I kind of forgot to ask, sort of, if somebody has no idea, but they're listening to this anyway, and good for them, sort of where they should start with Robert Anton Wilson, and if that is in fact sort of what you're thinking is the place to start.
For sure, I would recommend Cosmic Trigger as kind of a fun read. It gets pretty deep, but it's not too like overbearing. Or Prometheus Rising is really the great book about the model, which is like kind of neurological relativity and how we're all
Mm-hmm.
kind of in this subjective world. Like the thing is, are we living in a simulation? And in a local picture, we all kind of create our own simulation, and this kind of explains that in a
Mm-hmm.
way, and how you can change the simulation or unplug from the simulation. It has like 30 books specific to the politics book that we've been addressing on this show. There is that one essay, Left and Right: A Non-Euclidean Perspective. It's a pretty long, in-depth essay. Given the political nature of your show here, I'd say that would be a great single point of reference, without, if you didn't want to buy the book and just kind of figure out what this guy's about.
And finally, I guess, where should the people go to, to find you, find Robert Anton Wilson, both of you, on the internet?
Yeah, I have a link tree I sent you. I mean, Hilaritas Press, again, is the publisher of the Robert Anton Wilson Trust. We've put all his books out. I say we, I've had a small role with the last two that we've discussed. And I have the podcast for
Mm-hmm.
the press that I do. So the Hilaritas Press website is where you'll find.
Well, non-Serviam on every social media on Earth, especially like Blue Sky. You can find me on Blue Sky, Mastodon, which I forgot about, but I'll come back to. Yeah, mostly Blue Sky. It's a terrible Twitter replacement with all the time suck that implies, but it is kind of fun. So follow me there, and follow Mike. Read more Robert Anton Wilson. I would, and Mike would. So yeah, thanks for joining us, Mike. This was a really good talk. I enjoyed it a lot.
I did too. Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to the Non-Serviam podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe over on our YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us across social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Mastodon. If you're extra interested in seeing this project continue, consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com. But if you can't contribute financially, we still like you a whole lot. And you can help us out just by liking and sharing this episode or any other one that catches your fancy. As always, shout out to our existing patrons. Your support helps us reach a larger audience and helps keep this project alive. Thanks so much.